welcome to today's Snack and Learn session. Very, very pleased to have you all online. Today's session is Designing for the Mind and Body, and this is in consideration to neurodiversity and accessibility as well. So just before we get into the session, some housekeeping. The presentation will be available to download in the handout box for you. Please do feel free to ask questions. We won't be able to answer them as we go along, but there is a question box that you can use and we'll come to those in the end. Just to introduce myself, my name is Sarah Taylor. I sit within WSP UK and within that part of the business, Earth and Environment, and feel really passionate about accessibility. And I've been working with Beth for probably nearly a year now on a neurodiversity paper that is coming very soon, which Beth is going to talk to you about. And I think, yeah, it's put another really interesting spin on what was already quite a challenging picture when we're considering general accessibility anyway. So that's me. I'm just going to pass you to Beth now to introduce herself.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Williams, and I'm currently a graduate sustainability consultant. I sit within the environment team here at WSP, and I've been working on this project, as Sarah said, for about a year. And I was first introduced to this as part of my summer internship, which I conducted as part of my master's degree. So it's been a long time coming working on this, and it's just been such a great piece of research to do, and it's just great to see everything come to life. So very excited to have this today.
Thanks, Beth. Right, we're going to get into the presentation now. So I'm just going to flick off my web camera. I'll say web camera. So good morning or good afternoon or maybe good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Before we get into the session, I just wanted to talk to you about what we're going to talk about today. We've got a lot to get through. So it will be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of neurodiversity and exploring how we can design better for our minds. We're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by neurodiversity, just to start with, why engagement matters so much when we're looking at neurodiversity and accessibility, some findings from Beth's amazing research, and also look at how we can put this into practice as well. So, Beth, do you just want to give a quick summary of your paper and when it's coming?
Yes, sure, thank you. So Future Ready in the UK had commissioned this paper last year as a piece of thought leadership on the back of a few key trends that had been identified, which I'll run through in a moment. And it's currently an upcoming publication, so it's not out yet, but it's in the final stages of review. So as Sarah said, this session is a sort of taster or a bit of a feel of things to come. And just to mention as well, if anyone is interested in seeing the final report once it's out, please let us know and we'll make a note of your contact details. So possibly if you just pop your name and your email in the chat box or the question box, then we can save that and get back to you later. Okay, so just to crack on, next slide, please, Sarah. So just to set the scene of this project, as I said, Future Ready had identified some trends surrounding mental health and non-visible disability that are likely to affect our work in the sustainability of the built environment now and far into the future. And when looking into the current landscape of inclusive design, there was a distinct lack of standards for designing for the mind, which, given that 96% of chronic medical conditions are non-visible, is clearly a glaring issue. So as engineers and placemakers, we asked ourselves, what can we do to overcome the challenge of designing inclusively for an aging, well-being conscious and neurodivergent population? So this research links strongly to SDG Goal 11, which centres around the idea of making cities and human settlements more inclusive, safe and sustainable. And also, since writing our report, the new BS Pass 6463 standard, which is actually called Designing for the Mind, has been drafted. And interestingly, it's been pushed back quite a few times. It's due to be published in September, which we think might have been pushed back due to potential conflicts with existing standards on accessible design for physical disability, which we'll touch on a bit later. And our research has really validated this challenge, and clearly there's greater attention that we all need to give to work out how to integrate these conflicting needs to properly design inclusive standards to really get this right. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Beth. So Before we get into what we should be doing, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we mean by neurodiverse, neurodivergent, and neuroatypical. All of these terms refer to the diversity of the human brain and the uniqueness that occurs from person to person. There is no standard definition for neurodiversity. It should really be considered a sort of umbrella term and just a way to understand how we all experience and interact with the world differently. We'll be talking about neurodiversity in its broadest sense today. So that's including but not limited to things like stress, depression, anxiety disorders, dementia, autism spectrum disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder as well. Through the research that's been carried out in preparation for the paper that's going to be published shortly, we did find that boundaries and language became harder to define and very subjective. So when does poor mental health become mental illness? And maybe that definition between wellness and illness is becoming less clear. In short, we started asking ourselves, is anyone really neurotypical? If we do take this more holistic view, then we're no longer talking about a percentage of the population, we're talking about everyone at some time in their lives. So designing for the mind becomes even more of a priority. To be neurodiverse is often framed as negative in the media. It's a narrative that suggests people need to be fixed or are broken. And in fact, the biggest barriers that many people face are the way in which the world and society is designed or organized. So we asked ourselves, what can we do to remove these barriers? And we think as designers, as engineers, as consultants, whatever we call ourselves, we have a really unique opportunity to influence the built environment, stimulate that discussion at policy level, work with our clients to develop designs and communities without barriers as well. And in turn, that this will cultivate a more independent and equal society, promoting choice and promoting agency for everybody.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So, as previously mentioned, a lot of research went into conducting this paper over quite a long period of time. And the backbone of this research was a series of interviews with people connected to neurodiversity in some way. So, either through personal lived experience or perhaps as a partner or a parent of somebody who was neurodivergent, or maybe as an expert in the field of inclusive design. And we did also interview quite a few WSP colleagues with this kind of background as well. And we use these insights alongside a lot of secondary desk-based research to create these 4 user personas that act as a tool to explore potentially beneficial changes in design. And in the report, each persona describes how neurodivergence may present different challenges within the built environment, and then goes on to suggest a few potential design suggestions then that are given for each persona to demonstrate how a person with, say, dementia, autism spectrum condition, or anxiety, for example, may benefit from certain changes in design. So just as a caveat, these personas aim to represent a cross-section of experiences and barriers, rather than, as Sarah has mentioned before, I think, if you've met someone with autism spectrum condition, you've only met one person. So these personas are made to be sort of descriptive and representative rather than, a catch-all. And intersectionality is a huge takeaway here. And we recognize that these experiences may not reflect everyone's experience. So rather, they tend to highlight commonalities. Next slide, please, Sarah. So just building on these commonalities, we've curated 4 key themes that help to narrow down some important issues that we discovered. So, as I said before, while not exhaustive, these are good starting points for improving the way we may design for neurodivergence. So these themes are experiencing sensory overload and sensitivity to different stimuli, processing information and responding to surroundings, wayfinding and orientation, and then finally impacts on mental health and well-being. So just to move on, for this first theme, to do with sensory, the most frequently cited common challenges within this theme were a sensitivity to things like bright, flashing, complex, or erratic light, loud, unexpected, repetitive, and reverberating sounds, also clashing colours, multiple colours in one space, visually complex patterns and reflective surfaces, and then also high contrasts between areas of dark and light. And then in response to this, some common reactions to these sort of design features that were noted from the people that we interviewed were feelings of confusion or frustration, distress and disorientation as well. So in response to this, we kind of took a step back to think about how we can focus on some beneficial design aspects that address the sensory experience of a space. So from a design perspective, some things that you might want to focus on. You might want to incorporate some changes to lighting by focusing on creating smooth transitions between areas of light and dark or between spaces with different uses by using lighting. You might want to think about incorporating warm toned lighting and to avoid erratic or bright colours within your light, and also to maximise the use of natural light where possible at all times. As for sound, then perhaps look at using acoustic dampening materials and to minimize multiple clashing sounds within the same space, and also aim to design acoustically sensitive environments that generate white noise. And then as for materials and decoration, we found it would be beneficial to try and use the same colors and materials for the same features. So things like walls are one color, floor is all another color. And then also try to incorporate smooth architectural lines where possible, especially in indoor settings as well. And then just to focus on the sensory experience overall, it's really beneficial to try and focus on creating low stimulant environments. So something that was really useful that was noted in a few different case studies were things like designated low sensory zones or quiet rooms within busy areas. You also may want to look at, if possible, incorporating adjustability as a theme. So maybe through the likes of adjustable light or sound levels. Ventilation was really important as well. And also to try and avoid introducing lots of scents or kind of clashing scents and smells into one place. And also the introduction of tactile materials or surfaces, especially in spaces where people are likely to become distracted or distressed. This can help to hold engagement and create a sense of calm if people can have that sort of hands-on tactility with their environments. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Beth. So moving on, we're just going to look at processing. Now, processing relates to the issues that can accumulate as a result of difficulty sort of synthesizing information. And this can impact on a way a person might respond to or interact within surroundings. Our interviews showed that some people find it kind of harder to make decisions, follow instructions, or sort of understand the design or space they're in if they become stressed or anxious or overstimulated. And this can be as a result of maybe finding themselves in an unexpected sort of scenario or setting or something that doesn't make sense. So some of this is really also quite interconnected with wayfinding, which we'll come on to next. So in practice, what does this look like? Well, things that are designed without a clear explanation of how to use or interact with them. So don't assume a design speaks for itself. There's, where am I as a context? Where am I in a building? But there's also, why am I here? What is this space for? So that's how I would frame that. Activities and spaces that have lots and lots of different stages, things that are unexpected, or maybe have kind of changed away from quite a familiar format. So that can also cause difficulties as well. A lack of clear opportunities to ask for help or assistance, and multiple high stress decision-making points. In terms of mitigating some of these, so large legible signs at regular and repetitive intervals sounds obvious. I think we all can struggle with wayfinding sometimes, so it is really about thinking about the different user journeys and what they look like, mapping those out. Really great examples on screen here, but combination of text and pictures for signs. So don't just rely on one format of communication. It's the principle of two senses. So the more you can think about different ways to communicate information to people, giving people choice and agency, the more likely you are to kind of target a bigger audience. So consider obviously the use of colours as well. That's kind of a regular accessibility consideration, obviously for visual impairments, but think about that consistency throughout any kind of wayfinding strategy as well. And think about how you might communicate the purpose of a space. So example in the bottom right corner is actually from a care home. So you can see there indicating the sunflower lounge and dining through clear words and pictorial images. So it's kind of directive, but it's also purpose as well. So processing and moving on to wayfinding, which is, as I said, quite connected to those themes. And again, this comes with lack of regular directional cues, things in only one format. People tend to rely on quite intuitive wayfinding to find their way around. So it might be things like familiar and memorable landmarks, buildings or streets. Sightlines are very important as well. So being able to see where a particular route is going in order to make decisions ahead of a decision point. So giving people time again to process and synthesize information. Potentially people have difficulty in memorizing normative steps if there aren't instructions to go with those. So in terms of what can we do about this, how do we mitigate some of these things? Trying to reduce the number of steps to navigate somewhere or follow a route is a great place to start. And things like zoning with your wayfinding. So top image on screen at the moment is a picture of the BBC Cardiff office. I feel like this is being used a lot, put it that way, in lots of different case studies at the moment. They've won lots of awards for this, rightly so. It's really been kind of thought out, and you can see here how they've used colours and zones, but also that the kind of central atrium there also has become a landmark feature for navigation as well. So really clever. Some things to think about there to mitigate. And consistency is also really important as well. If you're going to implement a wayfinding strategy, making sure that it's consistent throughout a building, a space or a place as well. Just moving on to you, Beth.
Lovely, thank you. So really, a really big overarching theme that united all of these topics that we just mentioned was the prominence of the negative impacts on mental health and well-being that many neurodiverse people experience in response to the built environment. Some particular examples of this included overcrowded spaces or places that were loud and visually very fast-paced, or places that were visually monotonous, just on the opposite side of that argument, or areas that felt kind of quite repetitive, very samey. And then also a lack of green and recreational spaces as well was something that people noted as would just kind of exacerbate any existing feelings of stress, anxiety, or depression. It was also noted that the increase in impact of poor mental health from this would then have a spillover effect, as we all know can happen on other areas of life, such as work or relationships and general overall health and well-being. People also noted feeling quite uninspired, disengaged and unenthusiastic in a lot of public areas that they felt either weren't really catered to their needs or that they just generally found weren't really for them. And then a really big one that we had quite a few times in our responses was people just completely avoiding certain areas that they felt weren't for them or they weren't comfortable in, or they were completely maybe change their route to work or avoid certain modes of transport that they didn't feel comfortable with using. So in response to this, all of the discussed design interventions that we've mentioned today can help to positively contribute to overall well-being and mental health. And there's really no one simple solution or plan of attack, but I think really rather the focus should be on helping every person to feel safe. That's a really big point to take away, included and valued within a space. But if we really want to hone in on supporting mental health and well-being directly through design, some important things you might want to focus on, particularly is incorporating elements of biophilic design where you can. So generally speaking, that's just the use of plants and natural materials as much as practically possible, whether that's indoors or outdoors. So the physical access to nature is really important, as was the provision of quiet spots and recreational spaces as often as possible. This was particularly poignant, people mentioning that they enjoyed within a public space being able to access areas of play or areas of quiet, but also because safety is a really big issue here and inclusivity and making people feel comfortable. A big thing that came up was people expressing their want to be able to choose whether they want to engage in social interaction. So providing maybe some thresholds for social interaction to take place if people want to was really key. So this links back to zoning that I think Sarah had mentioned before. So providing spaces for socializing, or providing spaces for maybe a bit of quiet time, bit of reflection, for people to be in the action if they want to, but a safe distance away that they feel secure enough. And then similar to this, look to provide spaces with clear opportunities to retreat or exit, which also links back to previously mentioned things to do with wayfinding and orientation, which was having very clear lines of sight. So giving people the opportunity to retreat if they want to, or to exit quite easily if they feel like they want to get out of an area. So as well, a really key thing I think to think about is just not to assume that a design speaks for itself, and to provide as much instruction or indication as to what a certain area is for. For example, maybe how to use a machine, or really anything that user will come into contact with. Which also spills on over to another broader theme, which was, if we want to really kind of streamline this inclusivity, is to help support every person having agency over how they want to experience the built environment. So we want to aim for equitable experiences or equal enjoyment of places, I think is a really important mantra that we should be taking forward. So focusing in on how people may react to their surroundings is an important lens to take when thinking about making designs more neurodiverse appropriate. So difficulty synthesizing information was a common reaction or issue connected to all of the above themes and a lot of topics discussed in our interviews. So someone feeling unsafe or disconnected or excluded from their surroundings by design is, I think, a clear marker for a non-inclusive environment. So, somebody may be able to access a space with ease, physically, but if they don't feel comfortable there, or perhaps take the steps to avoid it completely, as I mentioned before, happen quite a lot, I think it's time to take it back to the drawing board. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Beth. That's great. So I think we are going to, I'm going to race through this one because I do want to make sure that there's plenty of time for questions as well. And I know that we're rapidly approaching the end of the session. So when do we need to think about designing for our minds and our bodies? Well, in short, all the time and everywhere would be my answer to that. I think it's really important that we are asking ourselves, who am I willing to exclude? So often when we're looking at placemaking or designs, we look at, the number of percentage of users, how many disabled people are using this, what the percentage of neurodiverse people, etc. And I think it's probably the wrong question. We need to be looking at the barriers that will prevent people accessing this park, building office now and in the future as well. There's a moral imperative here. I'm feel quite passionately about that, to design fair and exclusive spaces. But by doing that, we are future-proofing our communities and our society. If you look at aging population as a trend, if you look at mental health and resilience, if we think, I would say low estimate, 15% of the world population may be neurodiverse, I would suggest that it's probably likely to be far higher than that. So this really is about designing for everyone. It's more than an exercise in compliance. Building standards and regulations will only go so far. So we really need to be considering inclusive design from the outset and engaging early to understand user needs and priorities. It's much easier to design spaces from the outset than it is to try and retrospectively do this later. So I think we're going to move on to some.
Okay, thank you, Sarah and Beth, for your presentation. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, if you can open the webcam,
Thanks,
it will be great.
Great.
Thank you. So just a reminder, you can log your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar platform. And also we have in the handouts the presentation slides for you to download. So I will start with the first question. It's very short. How do we consider intersectionality?
Beth, you all right if I jump on that one?
Of course, yeah, go ahead.
Massive question. So thank you whoever answered that one. First of all, I'm just going to explain intersectionality. What does that mean? It's how different aspects of a person's social or political identity can sort of combine to create different types of discrimination or privilege. So it's the bigger picture surrounding somebody, I guess. So broadening out, and Beth touched on this, intersectionality is a massive part of this. Nobody is a monolith, there is no woman, there is, we don't want to create reference man again from the 50s. So in terms of making sure we do this, really, this is about education. So I would challenge you to think about how much do you and your teams and the people you work with understand intersectionality, identities and definitions. So, what are those? Like we said, it's gender, ethnicity, disability, socioeconomic status. There are more, there's loads more. I'd suggest a workshop to think about this, because the biggest way you're going to get change on projects and in designs is by understanding this as individuals and feeling passionately about it. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of stakeholder engagement, outreach, consultation. Speak to people who have lived experience of these things and get that engagement early on and build it in. Me and Beth attended a workshop recently, which was amazing, but it was quite late in the design process, and it was really quite difficult at that point to retrospectively start looking at what we could do differently. Choice and agency for people are your mantra. So always think about multiples. You are never dealing with one person with one barrier or one issue. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. The next question is, how can we embed this into all project execution plans?
Another one. Okay, I'm gonna jump on this, Beth, but feel free if you wanted to add anything as well. Change. This is all about change, isn't it? Which is always going to be a combination of culture and process. So I would be looking for opportunities where you've got hard gates in your business or your process or your systems where you can implement considerations or guidance around this. Is there any level of sign-off that could be included? Because I think it's an old saying, what gets measured matters. So starting to understand your baseline of how often are we not doing something can often be helpful to start understanding how you do start doing something. So yeah, maybe that's food for thought. I'll leave it there because we've got more questions, I'm sure.
Yes, next one is 2 questions actually. How can transportation be made more accessible, and how can access to recreational space be more accessible as well?
I can give this one a go, Sarah, if you want. So I think, as mentioned before, time and time again, using choice as a platform, as a complete starting point, I think is really important to look at. I think not focusing on what can we not do. It's just going right back to the drawing board, looking at all of the potential beneficial design interventions that can be included, and just lots of discussion with, as Sarah mentioned before, as many stakeholders as possible. And I think, we will all find that this will end up being, just an ongoing process of balancing different needs. There's no one silver bullet solution to anything. I think it's just about incorporating as many perspectives into designs from day one as possible. Go beyond the building standards. I think compliance shouldn't be the main motivator here. Lots of blue sky thinking never goes amiss, I think. And consider the bigger picture. We're all starting to understand now that access isn't just about physically accessing a space. It should be about removing barriers into, to better inclusivity, whether that's financial, safety barriers, etc. So anything really that says this isn't for me or causes people to avoid using things that we should all be able to use equally, I think.
Fantastic, thank you. And the next question is about accessibility in the built environment. It goes like this. What do you think is the common threshold for accessibility in buildings, and how should the built environment keep open to change?
Do you want me to take this again, Sarah? So I think similar to what I mentioned before is that often I think this can be seen as an exercise in compliance, when I don't think it necessarily has to be anymore if these conversations become a little bit more streamlined and normalized. And I think building regulations don't alone make a space accessible. As we've seen from a few different case studies that we brought in, spaces look a lot different to what you might expect from a building that is inclusive. I think the bar is currently quite low, given that when we started this research, right back, it was about this time last year that I started on this paper, there was no rumours about any inclusive building standards coming out about designing for the mind. Luckily, very quickly into the research that did come about, and like I said, there is a standard coming up which should hopefully, we've seen drafts of it, and it's, you know, hopefully it's going to do what we need it to, but we do need to still be more ambitious, and we need to think about this from the outset, as I said before, thinking right from the onset of design. And we're not talking about a handful of people, and there's no such thing as neurotypical. This is really for everybody, and this is something that the paper really tries to hone home, is that if you look for designing for neurodivergence, really this helps everybody. So yeah.
Thank you for this. We received just a comment here about how wayfinding is so difficult in hospitals, and how difficult it is to find your way in narrow, dark corridors, and you lose your sense of direction after about 3 turns. So yeah, it's indeed very difficult, and so super important to start thinking about this. I will take the last question just because minding the time. How can we help our clients understand neurodiversity and make it a priority here?
Oh gosh, Beth, I'll do a bit, and then do you want to jump in with some ideas as well?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, so again, this is educate, inform. I think it's really hard to make something a priority if your business lacks representation as well. So I would say that this is really about, again, lived experience and having people around you. Often when we have to go out and find people who've got lived experience, it's because we don't have that representation in house. So I think it does come back to also how you prioritize inclusion and diversity in house, because that does kind of manifest elsewhere. But these kind of sessions, I would say, are a great way to engage with our clients and people, and help them understand what we mean when we talk about neurodiversity, when we talk about inclusive design. And really, it's moving past, as Beth said, those compliance exercise, and understanding that, I think, you know, the average building life is what, 150 years. So if we're designing 150 years in the future, are we really certain now, given there's been a relatively, I would say, underwhelming progress around some of this for quite a long time, that in 150 years time that we'll be confident that we're really thinking about this? And that's where our Future Ready program, I think, really comes into itself. Beth, would you add anything?
Yeah, for sure. Just thinking about what you said there, I think a really important takeaway is trying to use the resources that you've already got. With this paper, first starting out on the research, we kind of hit a few roadblocks with where we wanted to take the interviews, what kind of leads we had. And we decided to look internally and use our WSP resources. And I think that it will always be surprising about how many different perspectives we already have on our doorstep that we just don't really recognize. So I think taking that forward into projects again is about trying to diversify how many different people you have on a project, because I think that having broad representation, different perspectives, will never not be valuable with whatever challenge comes up. And as I said, just using the resources you've already got, talk to as many people as possible. I know often we're bound by time and resourcing issues, but I think this is an issue of sustainability. This isn't about compliance, and I don't think it should be a box ticking exercise. I think this really will become the norm far into the future, to be honest. So yeah, lots of talking, as much diversity as possible, as always. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you so much. So we're at the end of our webinar session. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Please feel free to follow up directly with Sarah and Beth via the contact details shown on the screen. And please, if you are interested in the paper that is going to be released soon, please reach out to them directly to receive a copy. So I would like to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you very much for your time. Sorry for going over time today. We hope to see you in future webinars. And thank you, Sarah and Beth, for a fantastic and super important presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.